Ariana Matthews, a high-powered tech CEO, thought she was stepping onto a routine flight to Seattle. Little did she know, this flight would spark a battle for her dignity and a fight for fairness. As she approached her first-class seat, 2B, a man, smug, entitled, and arrogantly sitting in her seat, refused to move. Derek Holloway, a wealthy businessman who had not paid for the seat, was about to ignite a fiery confrontation that would unfold in front of hundreds of viewers. What starts as a simple dispute quickly turns into an explosive drama, an intense fight for justice in the sky. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with more powerful stories like this one. Ariana Matthews, a successful tech entrepreneur and CEO, boarded her flight from Dallas to Seattle, excited to attend a crucial business meeting. Her first-class ticket was a well-earned luxury, providing her with a space to unwind and prepare for the challenges ahead. As she approached her designated seat, 2B, she was surprised to find another passenger occupying it. A man in a well-tailored suit, looking smug and entirely too comfortable, sat in her seat without a care in the world. His name was Derek Holloway, a wealthy businessman who had managed to secure a seat in first class despite not having paid for it. "Excuse me," Ariana began, her voice calm but firm, "that's my seat." Derek glanced up at her, barely acknowledging her presence. A smug grin spread across his face as he nonchalantly shifted in the seat, making it clear he had no intention of moving. "I've been upgraded," he said dismissively, as if that would automatically grant him ownership of the seat. Ariana frowned, trying to remain composed. She had earned this seat with her hard work, paying the full price for a first-class ticket, and now here was this man, who hadn't even gone through the proper channels, sitting in what was rightfully hers. "I don't believe you've been upgraded," she said, standing her ground. "I have a first-class ticket for 2B. You're in my seat." Derek's response was a mix of arrogance and entitlement. He barely made eye contact with Ariana as he leaned back, his tone dismissive. "I've been upgraded, sweetheart. You're going to have to find somewhere else to sit. I'm not moving." As Ariana stood there, she felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How could this man be so confident in his entitlement? She had encountered her fair share of entitled individuals in her line of work, but this was something else entirely. What should have been a simple exchange of a passenger in the wrong seat had quickly escalated into a battle of wills. At this point, a flight attendant, Rebecca, arrived at the scene, seemingly siding with Derek before even hearing Ariana's side. "Is there a problem here?" Rebecca asked, her voice neutral, but her gaze immediately shifted to Ariana with a look of mild annoyance. Ariana explained the situation, hoping that the flight attendant would at least verify her seat assignment, but Rebecca brushed her off. "There's been a system glitch," she said, without giving Ariana much of a chance to speak. "Derek here has been upgraded, so the seat is his now." Ariana's frustration deepened as she realized what was happening. She wasn't just being ignored, she was being dismissed, as if her rights as a paying customer didn't matter. She had paid $1,600 for this ticket, and yet here she was, forced to confront a man who didn't deserve her seat, with an airline staff member actively siding with him. It became clear to Ariana that she was not just battling for a seat, but for respect in a space where her worth as a paying customer was being disregarded. Derek's smug demeanor and the flight attendant's indifference pushed Ariana to the edge, and she knew that this situation wasn't going to end quietly. As the tension in the air grew, Ariana made a decision. She wouldn't let this go. She reached for her phone and began live-streaming the encounter, ready to show the world what was happening. What started as a personal conflict was about to become something far larger, as Ariana knew that there were many people out there who would empathize with her. She wasn't going to let Derek's entitlement and the flight attendant's refusal to do their job define the outcome of this situation. She was going to fight back. Ariana's fingers trembled as she adjusted her phone to start the live stream, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what kind of reaction she would get, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let Derek walk all over her. Her followers, many of whom supported her in her professional endeavors, were about to witness a moment of corporate negligence and entitlement firsthand. She turned the camera towards herself, speaking directly to the viewers. "Hey, everyone. I'm on a flight from Dallas to Seattle, and I've just been denied my seat. This man, Derek Holloway, has taken my seat in first class and refuses to move, even though I have the right to be there. And to make things worse, the flight attendant, Rebecca, is siding with him, saying there's a system glitch." Ariana paused for a moment to let her words sink in. This is what we're up against, people like Derek who think they can take whatever they want and get away with it. Well, not today. The live stream quickly gained traction, with viewers commenting in support of Ariana's frustration. Messages like, "This is outrageous," and "She's right. Hold your ground, Ariana," flooded the screen. Ariana couldn't help but feel empowered by the wave of support. She had always been an advocate for fairness, but seeing others rally behind her in real time fueled her determination. She wasn't just going to let this moment pass. Derek, sensing the shift in the dynamic, grew more agitated. "What is this, some kind of public spectacle?" He sneered, clearly uncomfortable with the attention Ariana was drawing. "You're causing a scene for no reason. Just sit somewhere else." But Ariana wasn't having it. "No," she responded firmly, "I paid for this seat, and I'm not going to back down. The fact that you feel entitled to something that isn't yours says a lot about your character. And Rebecca, you're supposed to be here to help passengers, not support the person who's in the wrong." Rebecca's eyes shifted nervously, the situation clearly becoming more uncomfortable for her. She glanced over at Derek, who was still trying to assert his dominance. "It's not personal," Rebecca muttered, avoiding Ariana's gaze. "There's nothing I can do about it. The system shows an upgrade. I'm just doing my job." The situation was escalating, and the attention Ariana was gathering from other passengers was growing. People were starting to look up from their books and phones, paying attention to what was unfolding before them. Ariana's phone buzzed with more comments from her viewers, many of whom were echoing the same sentiments. They were appalled by the way she was being treated. As the exchange continued, more passengers began speaking up in Ariana's defense. "You should be in that seat," one woman called out from a few rows back. "This guy is taking advantage of the system." Derek's arrogance was quickly becoming his downfall as more voices in the cabin joined the chorus of support for Ariana. With every passing minute, it became increasingly clear that Ariana wasn't just fighting for a seat, she was fighting for fairness in a world that often overlooked people like her. She wasn't about to let Derek and Rebecca win this battle. The flight attendants and Derek clearly underestimated the power of social media. As the live stream continued, more and more people tuned in, demanding justice. What began as a simple confrontation had quickly turned into a social media movement, and Ariana knew that the more people watched, the harder it would be for the airline to justify their actions. Ariana's phone buzzed as her live stream began to go viral. The tension in the air had shifted, it was no longer just a simple conflict over a first-class seat. The passengers were beginning to take notice, their eyes glued to Ariana as she continued speaking passionately into the camera. The once quiet cabin was now filled with murmurs and low chatter as people started to weigh in, offering their support for her cause. "Can you believe this?" Ariana said, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "This man, Derek Holloway, has taken my seat without paying for it. I've got a first-class ticket, a seat I paid $1,600 for, and he thinks he can just take it because of some so-called upgrade." She turned the camera to Derek, who was still lounging in the seat, looking smug and completely unapologetic. The screen filled with comments as her audience began to grow. "This is outrageous. #Justice for Ariana," one viewer wrote. Another comment followed, "Derek is a disgrace. He's stealing someone's seat, and now he's getting away with it." Ariana's followers were livid, and the momentum was quickly building. As she continued to explain her side of the story, passengers around her began to chime in, offering their thoughts on the situation. One man in the front row stood up and turned to look at the scene. "I can't believe this is happening," he muttered under his breath. "You should be in that seat. I saw her get on first class. He doesn't belong there." A woman a few rows back added her voice to the conversation. "That's just wrong. She paid for that seat, and now he's just taking it. This needs to be dealt with." The more passengers spoke up, the more Derek's smug expression began to falter. He had been certain that he could simply ignore Ariana, but as the live stream grew, so did the pressure on him. The dynamic in the cabin was shifting, the attention was no longer on Derek's entitlement, but on the growing support for Ariana and her fight for fairness. Rebecca, the flight attendant, who had initially sided with Derek, began to look increasingly uncomfortable. She glanced nervously around the cabin, noticing the rising tension and the attention that Ariana's live stream was garnering. Passengers were becoming more vocal, and Rebecca could no longer ignore the situation. "I'm just doing my job," Rebecca repeated, but her words lacked conviction. She had hoped the issue would resolve itself quietly, but it was clear now that it wouldn't. The problem wasn't just Ariana or Derek, it was the way the airline was handling the situation, or rather, mishandling it. Ariana, noticing Rebecca's discomfort, seized the opportunity to drive home her point. "This is about more than just a seat," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "This is about fairness. This is about how people like Derek, who think they can buy their way into anything, get special treatment while others are left to fight for what's rightfully theirs. It's time we call out this kind of behavior, and we have to do it together." The viewers on her live stream flooded the comments with support. "Ariana is right. Don't let them bully you. This is exactly why we need to speak up for each other." As more people spoke up, the situation in the cabin began to feel more like a standoff. Derek, who had initially been dismissive, now seemed uncertain. His eyes darted between the growing crowd of passengers and Ariana, who remained calm and collected. It was no longer just about the seat, it was about standing up for what was right in the face of entitlement and corporate indifference. Ariana's live stream was now drawing significant attention. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story, and social media was buzzing with hashtags like #JusticeForAriana and #EntitlementExposed. The airline was starting to realize that what they had hoped would be a small, quiet dispute had turned into something much larger. As the momentum of the situation built, the staff seemed to become more agitated, and Ariana knew that she had to stay focused. "I'm not going anywhere," Ariana declared, her resolve growing stronger with each passing minute. "This is about doing the right thing, and I'm not going to let Derek or anyone else get away with this. I've worked hard for what I've achieved, and I won't let anyone take that from me." But Derek, clearly not used to being challenged, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You've got no right to make this into a spectacle," he said, his voice rising in frustration. "You're making a scene, and it's embarrassing." Ariana stood her ground, meeting Derek's anger with a calm confidence. "I'm not the one making a scene, Derek. You are. You're the one who's taken someone else's seat, and you're the one who refuses to take responsibility for it." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Derek seemed at a loss for what to do. He was used to getting his way, used to walking through life without facing any real consequences. But Ariana wasn't backing down, and neither were the passengers around them. The fight for justice wasn't just Ariana's, it was everyone's. As the live stream continued to capture every moment, passengers began to speak louder, demanding that the flight attendants take action. Ariana wasn't just fighting for a seat anymore, she was fighting for accountability, for respect, and for the fair treatment of all passengers. The situation continued to escalate as the live stream gained more traction. Ariana's followers were now in the thousands, their voices joining in unison to demand justice. But while the passengers and viewers rallied behind her, the flight attendants were scrambling to regain control of the situation. At first, Rebecca, the flight attendant who had sided with Derek, had hoped that the incident would blow over. But with the live stream gaining momentum, it became clear that this was no longer a minor issue. The airline's image was at stake, and they needed to act quickly to suppress the growing attention. Paul, another flight attendant who had been silently observing the scene, approached Ariana with an air of authority. "Ma'am," he said, his tone suddenly cold and commanding, "you need to stop causing a disruption. If you continue to make a scene, I'll be forced to issue you a warning notice for disruptive behavior." Ariana's eyes narrowed as she looked at Paul, realizing what was happening. She was being framed as the problem in a situation where she was simply standing up for her rights. "A warning notice," she repeated, incredulity in her voice. "You're threatening me because I'm standing up for myself?" Paul didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for Rebecca to come over and assist him. Together, they started to search Ariana's bag, ostensibly looking for something to justify their actions. As they rifled through her belongings, Ariana's heart sank. She realized what was happening. They weren't looking for evidence of her rights being violated, they were looking for something, anything, that they could use to frame her as the aggressor. And then, Paul found it, a bottle of whiskey. Ariana had packed it in her bag for a gift she planned to give her business partner once she arrived in Seattle. It was a harmless item, but to the flight attendants, it was now a piece of ammunition in their plan to paint her as the problem. "Look what we have here," Paul said, holding up the bottle for everyone to see. "You've got alcohol in your bag, and that's against the rules. This is your fault." Ariana's stomach churned as she realized what was happening. They were trying to make her the scapegoat in a situation where she had done nothing wrong. The flight attendants were determined to shift the blame onto her and silence her voice, no matter the cost. As Paul continued to make accusations, Ariana felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on her. She had been trying to stand up for herself, to make her voice heard, but now she was being framed as the troublemaker. The airline had decided to protect their own image and make her the villain in this narrative. But Ariana wasn't about to back down. She was determined to fight for what was right, even if it meant facing threats and false accusations along the way. This wasn't just about the seat anymore, it was about standing up to the corporate system that allowed people like Derek to abuse their power without consequences. As the flight attendants' hostility grew, the passengers began to take notice, some of them whispering among themselves. Ariana could feel the eyes of the entire cabin on her, but she refused to be intimidated. She was stronger than this, and she knew that she had to keep pushing forward. The tension in the cabin had reached a boiling point. The flight attendants' aggressive handling of the situation, combined with Ariana's relentless determination to stand up for herself, had created an atmosphere of hostility. Passengers were visibly uncomfortable, their eyes darting between the escalating conflict and the increasingly tense faces of the crew. Ariana's phone buzzed with more notifications, her live stream was still going strong, and the world outside the plane was watching. But despite the growing support from her viewers and fellow passengers, Ariana could feel the situation slipping out of control. The crew, led by flight attendants like Rebecca and Paul, was becoming desperate to regain authority. It was clear they felt the pressure mounting, and with each passing minute, they seemed more determined to paint Ariana as the problem. "Ma'am," Paul's voice came through the tense silence. "This situation is becoming a disruption. We are requesting an emergency landing due to your behavior. If you do not calm down, we will have no choice but to escalate this further." Ariana's blood ran cold at the words. "Emergency landing," she repeated, her voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "You're threatening to land the plane over a seat? Over me standing up for my rights?" Paul gave a curt nod, his expression hardening. He had clearly made up his mind, and the accusation of disruptive behavior was his weapon of choice. "You've been causing a disturbance," he said, gesturing to the passengers who were now murmuring amongst themselves. "You're disrupting the flight, and we can't have that." Ariana's mind raced. The sheer audacity of the flight attendants was staggering. How had they become so focused on criminalizing her for standing up for herself? She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being painted as the villain in a situation she didn't cause. And now, they were using her resistance as an excuse to divert the flight, creating even more chaos in an already tense situation. "I am not causing a disturbance," Ariana said, her voice steady but carrying an underlying firmness. "I'm asking for what I paid for. I'm asking for fairness." The crew exchanged nervous glances, but it was clear that they had already made up their minds about how to handle this. They had found a way to redirect the blame onto Ariana, and they were going to follow through with it. Rebecca, the other flight attendant, stepped forward, her voice now laced with annoyance. "We're requesting an emergency landing because your behavior is disruptive. We cannot allow this to continue. If you don't stop, we will have no choice but to land early." The flight attendant's words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating the space around them. Ariana's heart raced, but she knew she couldn't back down. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about standing up to an airline and a system that would rather silence people like her than acknowledge their wrongs. "Fine," Ariana said, trying to keep her composure. "But I will not be silenced. You can land the plane, but I'll keep telling the truth. I will not let you sweep this under the rug. The world is watching." Her live stream had garnered even more viewers at this point, and the comments flooded in. People were starting to demand answers, to question the airline's actions. The pressure on the crew was palpable, but they didn't seem to care. They had one goal: to shut Ariana down, no matter what it took. Ariana felt the weight of the situation intensifying. Her phone had become her lifeline, the only connection she had left to the world outside the plane. The live stream was more than just a platform for her to speak out, it had become a tool for advocacy. The moment her phone was gone, her connection to the truth would be severed. But Ariana wasn't going to let that happen. As the plane descended toward an emergency landing, Ariana glanced around the cabin. She saw the fear in the eyes of the passengers, some of whom had begun to whisper and point. She knew they were witnessing something that was larger than just a seat dispute. It was a fight for justice, for fairness, and for accountability. Her resolve hardened. She couldn't let them silence her now. The flight had barely touched down when security personnel boarded the plane, their presence intimidating and official. Ariana felt a chill run down her spine as the officers moved toward her. She had been prepared for many things: unfair treatment, accusations, and resistance, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. The door to the plane opened, and two security guards stepped inside, their eyes scanning the cabin. They moved with purpose, their steps echoing down the aisle, and when they reached Ariana, the air seemed to grow colder. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice flat and authoritative. "We're going to need you to come with us." Ariana stood, her hands shaking slightly, but her determination remained unwavering. She wasn't going to back down. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing sense of dread. "What are you accusing me of?" The officer's eyes narrowed. "You're being removed from the flight for disruptive behavior. There's also a report from the crew that you've been aggressive with them. We need you to come with us now." Ariana's mind raced. She was being accused of aggression. This was unbelievable. She had been the one who was wronged, who had been ignored, dismissed, and then framed for a situation she didn't cause. And now, they were turning it around on her, using her defiance as proof of some imagined wrongdoing. "I haven't been aggressive," Ariana replied, her voice growing stronger. "I've simply been standing up for myself. The crew has no right to accuse me of anything." The officer didn't respond. Instead, he gestured for Ariana to follow him down the aisle. As she moved toward the exit, her phone, which had been recording the entire interaction, was snatched from her hand by one of the other security officers. The officer's grip was firm, and he quickly smashed the phone to the ground, breaking it beyond repair. Ariana's stomach lurched as the shards of her phone lay scattered on the floor. It was more than just the physical device that had been destroyed, it was her connection to the outside world, to the people who had been watching and supporting her. Without her phone, she was cut off from everything. The crew had effectively isolated her, and she knew that this was their plan all along. They wanted to silence her, to stop the truth from getting out. The security guards escorted her off the plane, and Ariana could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her as she was led down the jet bridge. Some looked away, embarrassed by the unfolding drama. Others whispered amongst themselves, unsure of what to think. As Ariana was led to a waiting area, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The airline had won for now. They had managed to take away her phone, to strip her of her connection to the world, and to make her look like the villain. But Ariana knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Back inside the terminal, the security officers moved her to a secluded area, where they continued to question her. But Ariana wasn't about to back down. "You can take my phone," she said, her voice cold and defiant. "But you can't take away my voice." She had seen the corporate machine in action before, how it tried to crush those who dared to challenge the status quo. But Ariana had learned that no matter how many times she was knocked down, she would always rise again. And this fight was far from over. Ariana stood in the sterile holding area of the airport, her hands clenched at her sides as she tried to compose herself. The security officers had left her alone for a moment, their heavy footsteps fading as they discussed her case in another room. She knew that they were trying to figure out how to handle the situation, but what they didn't realize was that Ariana had no intention of letting this go. She had been wronged, and now it was time to make the world see it. The moment the officers left her alone, Ariana's mind raced. She had already been denied her seat, humiliated, and falsely accused of aggression. Now, she had been cut off from the one lifeline that had kept her grounded throughout the entire ordeal, her phone. But even without her phone, she wasn't without options. The injustice she had endured wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about something much bigger, something far more insidious. This was about how people like her, people of color, were so often treated as inferior or second class in spaces where they should feel empowered. Ariana's fight for justice had become much more than just reclaiming her seat, it was about calling out the systemic issues that ran deep within the airline industry. It wasn't just about Derek, the arrogant passenger who had taken her seat, or the flight attendants who had enabled his entitlement. It was about the larger issue, the bias and discrimination that so often went unchecked. Ariana's thoughts were interrupted when she was led into a small office. The officer who had initially approached her, a middle-aged man named Officer Gray, was sitting behind a desk. He looked at her with a neutral expression but didn't offer a seat. Instead, he motioned for her to stand in front of him. "We've reviewed the situation, and we've received multiple complaints from the flight crew," Officer Gray said, his voice businesslike. "They've stated that you were being aggressive, and we've also found that you were in possession of alcohol during the flight, which is against the airline's policy. So, we'll be filing a report based on your behavior." Ariana's heart raced with frustration. The words felt like a punch to the gut, everything they were saying was a distortion of the truth. She had never been aggressive, she had simply stood up for herself. As for the bottle of whiskey, it had been a gift, one she had packed for a business partner. But now, it was being used against her, twisted into an accusation that painted her as the villain. "That's a lie," Ariana said, her voice steady despite the rising fury inside her. "I was not aggressive. I was simply standing up for my rights. I paid for that seat. I had every right to be there. And as for the alcohol, it was a gift. There was no intent to break any rules." Officer Gray's gaze never wavered. "You'll have to take that up with the airline, ma'am. You've caused a disruption, and they've decided to blacklist you from flying with us in the future." Ariana's blood ran cold at the mention of being blacklisted. This wasn't just about a bad experience, this was an attempt to permanently damage her reputation, to silence her for daring to stand up to the systemic injustice that had defined her experience. She had seen this before in her career, how powerful organizations tried to bury the truth and protect their image, no matter the cost. "This isn't just about a seat," Ariana said, her voice rising now, filled with conviction. "This is about how people like me, people of color, are treated in situations like this. You don't see it, but I do. And you should too. Officer Gray didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. We're just following protocol here, ma'am. The airline has rules, and we have to enforce them. But you're not enforcing the rules fairly, Ariana shot back. You're using those rules as a weapon to protect a system that is built on entitlement and privilege. You're letting people like Derek get away with their behavior while punishing me for standing up for myself. That's not protocol. That's discrimination. For a brief moment, Ariana saw something flicker in Officer Gray's eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even a hint of discomfort. But before she could say anything more, the door to the office opened, and another officer stepped inside. Officer Gray, we've got the airline's legal team on the phone, the new officer said. They're requesting we expedite this process. Ariana felt a surge of frustration. She could see the gears turning in the system, an effort to sweep everything under the rug as quickly as possible. But she wouldn't let it happen. She refused to be silenced. Let me make one thing clear, Ariana said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. I'm not backing down. I will make sure the world knows what happened here today. I will expose this for what it is. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They didn't respond, but Ariana could feel that her words had struck a chord. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her. She wasn't going to let them use their power to crush her. This was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur for Ariana. The incident had already made headlines, but not in the way she had hoped. Ellen Tate, a well-known television personality and frequent flyer, had taken to her talk show to give a one-sided account of the situation, one that painted Ariana as a troublemaker and Derek as the victim. In the interview, Ellen recounted her own experience on the flight, claiming that Ariana had caused a scene, disrupted the entire cabin, and made the flight uncomfortable for everyone involved. She played into the narrative that Ariana had been difficult and demanding, completely disregarding the reality of what had happened. Ellen's words were broadcasted nationwide, and soon, Ariana found herself at the center of a media storm. The airline's decision to blacklist her only fueled the fire. The public perception of Ariana was rapidly shifting from that of an empowered woman standing up for her rights to a disruptive passenger who had caused unnecessary chaos. Ariana sat in her office, watching the news coverage, her heart heavy with the weight of the false narrative. She knew that if she didn't take action now, the damage to her reputation would be irreparable. Her phone had been destroyed in the airport, but she was determined to find another way to speak out. She reached out to her legal team, demanding that they help her take action. It was time to fight back, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been unfairly treated by a system that was designed to protect the powerful and suppress the voices of those who dared to challenge it. I need to clear my name, Ariana told her lawyer over the phone. I need to expose the truth. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The airline had deep pockets, and their public relations team was already working overtime to bury the truth. Still, Ariana was undeterred. She had fought too hard to get to where she was, and she wasn't going to let a false narrative take her down. Her legal team worked quickly to gather evidence and prepare a counter-narrative, one that would shine a light on the airline's discriminatory practices and the way they had treated her during the flight. Ariana also worked with journalists, ensuring that her side of the story was heard. The media was beginning to pay attention to the larger issues of racial bias, and Ariana knew this was the moment to seize. It wasn't just about one flight or one seat. It was about challenging the very system that allowed people like Derek to abuse their power without consequences. It was about standing up to the corporate machine that sought to silence her and countless others. As Ariana prepared for the legal battle ahead, she couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. The fight for justice wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready for it. The world had seen the truth, and now it was time to make sure it was heard loud and clear. Despite the setbacks and the public backlash, Ariana Matthews refused to let the injustice she had experienced define her. The media storm, fueled by the biased narrative pushed by Ellen Tate and the airline's corporate machine, had painted her as a villain. But Ariana knew better. She had been wronged, and she wasn't going to let the powers that be silence her. In the days following the incident, Ariana's legal team had worked tirelessly to gather evidence of corporate malfeasance, and the social media posts and live streams had continued to rally support. Her voice was far from silenced. If anything, it had grown stronger, louder, and more determined. Ariana had become a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who had been wronged by powerful organizations that didn't value them. Her story had gone viral, and the hashtag Justice for Ariana was now a rallying cry for people everywhere who had ever faced discrimination, whether in the workplace or in everyday life. But it wasn't just about her fight anymore, it had become a movement. Ariana's legal team had already prepared to file a formal lawsuit against the airline, but her focus had shifted. The more she engaged with her growing base of supporters, the more she realized that this fight wasn't just about winning a legal battle, it was about making sure that other people, especially people of color, wouldn't have to go through what she had experienced. She had been contacted by multiple organizations that focused on racial equality and justice, offering their support. They wanted to work with her to create a platform for others to share their stories of systemic bias and discrimination, to shine a light on the injustices that had been swept under the rug for far too long. Ariana knew that she couldn't do this alone, but with the backing of her newfound allies, she was ready to take her advocacy to the next level. It wasn't just about changing her own life anymore, it was about changing the culture within industries like aviation and beyond, making sure that those who came after her would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. She was invited to speak at conferences and forums focused on diversity, inclusion, and corporate accountability. During her speeches, she spoke not only about her experience but about the broader issues at play. She talked about the ways in which systemic racism and bias were embedded in the fabric of many industries, how people of color were too often overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed. Her platform grew with each passing day. Ariana began to hold workshops for young entrepreneurs, particularly those from marginalized communities, teaching them how to use their voices to push for change. She worked with schools and universities, helping students understand the importance of standing up for their rights and advocating for justice. The more Ariana spoke out, the more people found courage to share their own stories. People reached out to her from all walks of life, telling her about their own battles with discrimination, whether it was being passed over for a promotion, dismissed in meetings, or treated unfairly by systems that were supposed to protect them. But through it all, Ariana remained grounded in the mission she had set for herself. This was more than just about her personal vindication. It was about building a community of support, creating an environment where people didn't have to fight alone, and ensuring that those in power could no longer ignore the voices of those they had marginalized. As she spoke on national stages, advocating for systemic change and promoting the power of social media as a tool for activism, Ariana became more than just a businesswoman or a victim of injustice. She had become a force for change, a leader in a movement that sought to bring light to the darkness of discrimination and inequity. As Ariana Matthews' campaign for justice gained more attention, so did the opposition. The airline, knowing that they were facing mounting pressure from the public, had begun to fight back. They had launched an aggressive PR campaign to try to repair their image, but it was becoming increasingly clear that their efforts were backfiring. Ariana's voice had become too loud, too powerful, and now, she had the backing of a movement that was not going to be silenced. The media, once complicit in spinning the narrative against her, had started to shift. News outlets began to take a more balanced approach, giving Ariana the opportunity to tell her side of the story. She had become a regular feature on talk shows and podcasts, where she was able to speak candidly about the systemic issues within the airline industry and beyond. But the fight wasn't over. The airline, determined to hold on to their power, had hired a team of legal experts and public relations specialists to discredit Ariana and derail her efforts. They launched counterattacks, attempting to discredit her character by digging into her past, looking for anything they could use against her. It was then that Ariana discovered something that would change the course of the entire fight. Through her network of supporters and allies, she received a tip-off about the airline's shady practices. Internal documents had surfaced, documents that showed a pattern of discrimination within the airline, not just in how passengers of color were treated, but also in hiring practices and promotions. Ariana's heart raced as she pored over the documents. This was the smoking gun she had been waiting for. The evidence of corporate malfeasance was irrefutable, and it had been hidden from the public for years. The airline had systematically excluded people of color from leadership positions, implemented biased policies, and ignored complaints of racial discrimination. Ariana knew that this was her chance to not only expose the airline's corruption but to create a precedent for future cases of discrimination. She immediately contacted her legal team and the press, sharing the incriminating evidence with them. The media picked up the story, and within hours, the airline's practices were exposed to the world. The pressure on the airline was immediate and intense. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, and within days, the airline was forced to respond. They issued a public apology, promising to implement new diversity and inclusion policies and pledging to work with outside organizations to ensure their practices aligned with equal opportunity laws. But Ariana wasn't done. She knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice wasn't over. The airline's apology was a step in the right direction, but Ariana was determined to make sure that real change would come, not just in the form of corporate promises, but in tangible actions. Her legal team filed a lawsuit against the airline, not just for the way she had been treated, but for the systematic racism that had plagued their operations for years. This lawsuit became a landmark case for civil rights, setting a precedent for future cases of discrimination in corporate America. As Ariana stood before a crowd of supporters at a press conference, announcing the legal action and speaking about the importance of fighting for justice, she felt a sense of triumph. It wasn't just about her fight anymore, it was about the countless others who had been treated unfairly, who had been marginalized, and who had been silenced for far too long. Ariana had uncovered the truth, exposed the corruption, and taken down an institution that had used its power to oppress. In doing so, she had become a beacon of hope and resilience, proving that one voice could indeed bring about change. The victory was sweet, but Ariana knew that the battle for justice was ongoing. And with her newfound platform, she was more determined than ever to continue the fight. Ariana Matthews' journey from a simple passenger dispute to a landmark fight for justice teaches us the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. In a world where systemic discrimination often goes unchecked, Ariana's resilience highlights the importance of using our voices to challenge unfair systems. Her refusal to be silenced by privilege and power shows that one person's courage can inspire others and spark meaningful change. Whether it's in a corporate setting or everyday life, standing firm in the face of injustice is vital. Don't let others' entitlement define your worth, assert your rights with confidence and integrity. If you found this story inspiring, like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more empowering content. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an update on the stories that matter.